is Marty Draper. I'm a National Program Leader for Plant Pathology and Integrated Pest Management at the National Institute of Food and Agriculture in USDA. We refer to it as NIFA. And I'm also the president of Epsilon Sigma Phi, the Extension Honor Society for Extension professionals. And over the previous 20 years before I came to USDA, I was an extension specialist. And I think that really reflects the background of many of my colleagues at NIFA. We have a deep regard for extension, and we really care about those folks that are out there in the field that are making things happen, working with youth, with families, with producers, and really trying to make everyone more successful in strengthening the American ideal. You know, ultimately, extension is about people. It's about people giving, helping, teaching, and people growing and learning how to do things better than they did before, how to make better decisions. Extension exists really as a collaboration of those entities I mentioned before, the federal government, state government, local governments, and these are all people supported through those entities banding together and showing that they care equally for those that we serve. Now, together, we make this engine run. It's really about doing everything together. Together we help the American people have better lives. Extension is sometimes seen as a farm program, but if you expressed that to a family that benefited from extension in New York City or in Dallas or in Atlanta, they might not see it that same way. They might be puzzled by your remark. Those folks using the services and programs in the city just see extension as people helping people. Helping them grow gardens and control pests, but also learning to develop leadership skills in their children, building coping skills for society, developing better eating habits, balancing the family budget, or maybe getting that help that they need to start some small business, whether they live in a city or they live in a rural area. So cooperative extension is about educating people in the life skills that they need so that they can make better decisions tomorrow than they made today. Just this past May, we went past the 100-year mark since Senator Hoke Smith of Georgia and Congressman Francis Frank Lever of South Carolina were able to move legislation through both houses of Congress to establish the Cooperative Extension Service. They agreed to implement a partnership model that borrowed from what was happening in various states, but also build on the examples of demonstration farming set by Seaman Knapp. Every time I come to downtown Washington, D.C., and walk across Independence Avenue, and I look up and see that easternmost arch that joins the Whitten Building and the South Building, and remember that that's the Seaman Knapp Memorial Arch, it really is an encouraging thing to me to help know that there's such appreciation for what Extension has been able to do, both from the USDA as well as from the American people. So we're very pleased to recently have received a letter from President Obama, and some of you may have seen it as you came in, recognizing the contributions of cooperative extension, and I'd like to read it for you now. It's dated July 8th, 2014, from the White House in Washington, D.C. And it says, I'm pleased to join in commemorating the 100th anniversary of the Smith-Lever Act. Signed into law by President Woodrow Wilson in 1914, the Smith-Lever Act established America's cooperative extension system. In the centuries since its creation, this nationwide educational and outreach network has made tremendous contributions to American agriculture, particularly in rural areas, and improved lives across our country. Through our cooperative extension system, land-grant colleges and universities bring vital, practical information to agricultural producers, small business owners, consumers, and young people at state, regional, and local offices. Today, this system continues to empower communities of all sizes to meet the challenges they face, adapt to changing technology, improve nutrition and food safety, prepare for and respond to emergencies, and protect the environment. As we reflect on the ways the Smith-Lever Act has strengthened America over the past 100 years, I commend the researchers, educators, and volunteers who power our cooperative extension system, and all those at the National Institute of Food and Agriculture who support their work. I wish you all the best as you continue and expand access to education and opportunity. And it's signed, Barack Obama. Now let's pause for a few minutes to see a few examples of extension and hear what some folks have had to say about it.
Better understand where we are, we have to understand where we've come from. A century ago, Congress created a nationwide cooperative extension service through the Smith-Lever Act to address rural agricultural issues. It formally established the partnership between the agricultural colleges and universities and the United States Department of Agriculture to create a transformative education system.
This year marks the 100th anniversary of the Smith-Lever Act of 1914, which established the Cooperative Extension Service. Extension is a unique educational partnership among federal, state, and local governments and the nation's land-grant universities to extend research-based knowledge to the American public and private industry. Over the years, Extension has connected individuals and families with resources and expertise of our nation's land-grant university system.
And as you noted, the Smith-Lever Act was passed in 1914. It's been around for 100 years, and in my mind, I think truly the global preeminence of America in general, and particularly about the food and agricultural enterprise, in large measure is attributable to that cooperative extension service. And Mr. Chairman, as you noted, the ability to grow food compared to what we were able to do 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, with fewer people and smaller acreages of land is an incredible testimony to the kind of work that Extension has done.
Well, thank you, Madam President. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor and privilege today to introduce Senate Resolution 107. This resolution marks the centennial of the signing of the Smith-Lever Act.
The Smith-Lever Act is significant because what it did was it formally established cooperative extension across the nation. So there were already extension efforts starting up in a variety of different places, most notably in Iowa. We'd already begun this great work of partnering with our citizens and our universities so that we could take our research out to the farmers, out to the people.
Hey, this is Reba McIntyre. I'd like to wish the Cooperative Extension Service a happy 100th birthday. Your local extension educators have been delivering the latest research and information from your state's land-grant university to you. And the Extension Service is home to 4-H, which gives kids positive youth development. I should know, I was a 4-H'er myself. So here's to a century of service and wishing you the very best for the next 100 years.
Better understand where we are, we have to understand where we've come from.
Okay, I think I need to stop that before we go on. There we go. There. Technology is wonderful when it works. It's now my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Sonny Ramaswamy. He's been the director of the National Institute of Food and Agriculture for approaching 3 years now. Prior to coming to Washington, he was Dean of the College of Agricultural Sciences at Oregon State University, Director of the Agricultural Experiment Station at Purdue University, Head of the Entomology Department at Kansas State University, and a faculty member at Mississippi State University. Dr. Ramaswamy brings a broad view of the land-grant system, and we're fortunate to have his leadership at NIFA and contributing to the future vision for agriculture at USDA. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ramaswamy.
Thanks very much for that kind introduction, Marty. Appreciate it very much. And thanks, everybody, for joining us here this afternoon. And also, I want to welcome not just the folks here in the room, and Dr. Parham, our Assistant Secretary, is here as well in the room with us in the Witten Building, in the USDA building in Washington, D.C. And we've got a whole bunch of people across the nation that are joining us as well this afternoon. I want to welcome everybody here this afternoon. So, I just leaned over to Caroline as Marty was making his comments, about the fact that in 1914 we had a President Woodrow Wilson, when the Smith-Lever Act was passed, and then we had a proclamation by a gentleman named Barack Obama, President Barack Obama, in the year 2014. Who'd have thunk it in those 100 years that you would have an African-American gentleman standing as the President of the United States? Mind-boggling to think of. That's one thing to think of as a nation, how far we've come as well. And when you think about extension itself, that's what I leaned over to Caroline about. It reminded me, those of you that are old enough, remember the television ads we used to have back in the day. We used to have cigarette ads as well. And there's a particular brand of cigarettes called Larks, and they would go, "You've come a long way, baby." It was really long cigarettes. Greg probably remembers those particular ads as well. And Greg and I are about the same vintage, I think, so I'm going to go ahead and assume that you've seen those ads. And really, when you think about extension, what the genesis of it was and where we're at today, it's an incredible journey. And what I wanted to do was to actually talk about the next 100 years. From my perspective, as I have been a part of this community here, the USDA family itself, helping lead the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, and also having been raised in India at a time when India couldn't feed itself. And it was the largesse of the American taxpayer that invested in my education, that invested in my ability to eat and things like that. In large measure, it was the extension folks that allowed me to grow up as well. And then I come to America, I get an education here in the American land-grant universities, and here leading this agency as well. So what I want to do, based on that long history of connections with my colleagues around the world, for that matter, that have been involved in extension, I want to share with you my perspective in the next 100 years here this afternoon. And so if you frame, whenever you think about the future, you step back and think about the past. Where do we come from? What's our DNA? And extension's DNA itself, the genesis of extension, as we know here in America, a very uniquely American invention, including the word extension itself. Its genesis, as in a lot of other things, comes from people that came to this land from other parts of the world, particularly Western Europe, particularly England. And many of these individuals that came here to America, they brought that knowledge about farming, they brought that knowledge about the need to ensure that scientific methodologies and scientific information could be incorporated in how we grow crops, how we raise livestock, and things like that as well. And so our genesis really starts back in Europe. And in fact, there are some individuals pictured here like C.V. Riley, Charles Valentine Riley, a fellow entomologist, by the way. He was named as the first entomologist by this department, our federal entomologist. C.B. Riley, back in the day, this is, back in the 1860s and 1870s, He actually started out as an entomologist in Missouri, in the state of Missouri. He was hired as the first state entomologist for Missouri. And when pioneers went across America and crossed the Mississippi, going across into Kansas and Nebraska and other territories, they were affected by all manner of vermin, the biblical plagues that we talk about, including, as shown in the, I think maybe I can use the cursor here. No, I can't. So bottom right-hand corner of the screen, you see the stylized grasshoppers that are taking on these humans in there. And in fact, one of the plagues that the farmers were exposed to were things like grasshoppers that were eating up their crops. And people like Charles Valentine Riley and others started thinking about, how do you deal with this? What sort of methods might be developed? And then take that knowledge and convey that to the farmers and livestock producers out there so they could go ahead and deal with vexing problems of this nature. And so Extension's origins actually start with the work of people like Charles Valentine Riley that started really back in the 1860s, 1870s. At the same time, we've got the Land Grant Act that's passed in here in Washington, D.C., signed into law by President Abraham Lincoln, that creates the land grant institutions. That is about providing educational opportunities to the disenfranchised, the poor, and the masses of our nation. And along with that, we have the genesis and the development of this land grant enterprise itself in this country. And so people like Charles Valentine Riley and others that were involved in this enterprise throughout the United States were able to start incorporating scientific knowledge into how to help farmers and livestock producers as well. And that's the genesis of where we come from. And then we come into the late 1800s. There are a lot of other individuals as well. In fact, as Marty said, that the arch that connects the South Building and the Witten Building, one of those arches is the Seaman A. Knapp arch. I don't know if anyone of you knows who the other arch is named for. Wilson, who was Secretary of Agriculture, actually at that time, back in the late 1800s. And so these individuals started thinking about, development of knowledge, the discovery of new knowledge, translation of that new knowledge, and then delivery of that new knowledge to the end user, so that the farmers and livestock producers, and for that matter, the average residents and citizens of this nation, might also be involved in taking this knowledge and to help them better their lives as well. So we come from that genesis, and so it culminates in 1914 with the passage of the Smith-Lever Act, as Marty said in his opening comments. And we consider Seaman A. Knapp, pictured here in this slide, as the father of extension itself. Of course, there's a whole bunch of others that precede him as well. There are many, many people that were involved in helping develop this concept. But he was out in the southern part of the United States, particularly in Texas, where the approaches of extension, which is taking knowledge, translating that, and delivering to the end users, started crystallizing in his mind and in the mind of others. And that was brought here into Washington, D.C., and in conversations with people in Congress, the Smith-Lever Act gets passed in 1914. The very simple idea behind the Smith-Lever Act was that it was a partnership between the federal government, the state government, and the local government. And in that partnership, then, you had a way to help facilitate the discovery of knowledge. And this knowledge that's been discovered can't just sit on a bookshelf, published in a scientific journal and sit on a bookshelf. It needs to be taken and translated, and then once it's been translated, it needs to be delivered to the end users. And what Extension does is literally, in all of these aspects, in this continuum of the discovery process, the translation process, and the delivery process itself, that then helps the end users. And these end users, as I said, could be young people, could be children, could be adults, could be farmers, could be livestock producers, you name it, and all of these individuals were being impacted by this sort of a discovery through delivery continuum that was invented here in the United States. And then, so the bottom line is, as you go from its genesis in the early 1900s through the rest of the century, it ends up being the sort of a tripartite effort that comes about within Extension itself. There is the engagement, and by this engagement, you're trying to understand what the needs are, and then you take that information, you go ahead and take the research discoveries, you translate those, and then you transform lives. And this has been the approach that we've used within Extension itself, is this discovery through delivery continuum, and the fact that there is this engagement, there is this translation, and there is this transformation of lives itself. It really comes down to transforming lives. And at the bottom of all of the efforts that Extension professionals are involved in is, at the end of the day, is to transform people's lives as well. So when you look at over the last 100 years, a lot of people have wondered, well, you know, is Extension's time over now, and have they kept up with the times? And indeed, if past history is any indication, I can tell you that the future is also going to be pretty darn good. If you look at the past history itself, in this particular graphic that I've got here, these are the different tools that our Extension colleagues have used. And those of you sitting in the back of the room, I don't know if you can see this graphic very well or not, but the bottom line is, it starts off with the kind of work that people like Seaman A. Knapp, Charles Valentine Riley, and others undertook, which was providing farmer field schools, where they would go in and host a day of events when farmers would come to particular locations where they would have field schools, and they would provide information about whatever particular problems that those farmers were encountering. And from there, it evolved into utilization of various types of technologies. You've got lantern slides. I don't know if anyone of you have seen these lantern slides. They're about 3 inches by 3 inches glass slides, and you hold those slides. It's a positive image on that slide. You hold that slide in front of a lantern, and very bleak images that you could see. But Extension professionals were one of the first ones to utilize lantern slides to be able to take information and make that available to the end users. And then with the invention of the radio, invention of moving pictures, all of those start becoming incorporated into the tools that our Extension professionals use. We come into the 1970s and 1980s and 1990s. You've got the invention of the Internet by none other than Al Gore back at that time in 1993. And all of these tools are being utilized by our Extension professionals in how they take knowledge and they translate that and use various mechanisms, various approaches to be able to deliver that information itself. Then we've got the utilization of podcasts. We've got the utilization of distance diagnostics and distance education. And then in the 2000s, in the most recent last decade, we've got yet another invention that comes along. It's referred to as E-extension, capital Extension. And these are basically a way to crowdsource the best knowledge, to bring it all together to help end users as well. And along with that, we've got the utilization of tablets and smartphones and MOOCs, massively online open courses, and Moodles and social media. And, you know, there's not anybody that doesn't use Twitter and Facebook and other means of delivering information as well. So what Extension has done in the last 100 years is, at the end of the day, it is about knowledge, it is about translating it, and it is about utilizing that information to help people's lives. But it requires that you use all different sorts of media to be able to deliver that information as well. And Extension has stayed with the times, as it were, over the last 100 years. So it's not enough to take information, it's not enough to translate information and deliver that and then go ahead and provide that to the end users and walk away from it thinking that somehow something good is happening. You've got to incorporate into it as well that an evaluation of that indeed there's something good that's coming out of the work that you're delivering as well, the knowledge that you're providing as well. This particular graphic, this publication on the left-hand side of that image there, Cooperative Extension work, United States Federal Extension Service Division out of USDA here. This is from the mid-1920s. And in that, on the right-hand side, you've got a histogram here that basically talks about different methods that particular extension professional utilized to deliver information. And what they're doing is to see if any one method is better than any other method in the information that they're translating and delivering as well. And so the idea is that in addition to translating knowledge and delivering it to the end users, you have to make sure that you're evaluating it as you go along as well. So making sure that indeed it is providing you the return on investment, as it were. And that's what our extension professionals ended up doing, is to incorporate these very, very effective evaluative tools to ensure the effectiveness of the programs that they were providing. Now you fast forward into the 21st century. That we're into, and then as we project out into the next 100 years itself. And when you look at the 21st century, we are now, we frame our conversations around all manner of challenges, societal challenges and other challenges that we think of as well. And when we think of these various types of challenges in the 21st century, one of those challenges to me is what is referred to as the new economy. This is a terminology that was developed by folks at Time magazine back in 1983. And they utilized this particular terminology to imply that the economies of Western Europe and the United States had transformed from a manufacturing economy to an information economy. And that's exactly what has happened, particularly starting in the 1980s, well into the latter part of the 20th century and the early part of the century. It's all been about information. And in fact, information is going to be one of the prime issues that we're going to have to deal with even as we project out into the next 100 years and beyond as well. But when you think of the new economy and apply it to what we think of in the food and agricultural enterprise, there's a whole slew of things that are having an impact on this. It's not just information itself. It is also issues pertaining to the global competition. Oh, that color just changed a little bit on that screen there. And, back in the day, when I'm saying back in the day, this is back in the 1960s and 1970s, the United States was the only player on the global scene. Today, you've got the so-called BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. You've got the European Union that has been formed since that time. You've got Japan. You've got all of these countries are all competing. So we are affected by that global competition. And so the extension professional of the 21st century then has to be mindful about this global competition as well. Along with that, we've got issues pertaining to this movement about sustainability, about the locavore movement, organic food systems, this controversy that we've got from organic to conventional food systems and industrial food systems and things like that as well. All of those are having an impact. This whole thing that's happened just in the last 3 to 5 years, fracking, that is our ability to go in and fracture rocks and the earth to pull up natural gas and oil reserves, is something that is having an impact already in the Marcellus Shale, for example, in West Virginia and Pennsylvania areas, and the kind of information that our extension professionals have to understand, because water is being used in these enterprises. There are some issues pertaining to the health impacts of fracking. All of these are going to have an impact on our extension professionals as well. So this new economy is driving our extension professionals now to actually develop better ways of translating that knowledge and deliver that knowledge as well. And then you've got these other things. Demographic changes. Look at the United States of America. Back in the day when Woodrow Wilson was the president, it was predominantly, you had a white populace and you had an African-American populace in this country. And then you fast forward 100 years later. Today, right now, in the last couple of weeks, as you know, schools just started. And for the very first time in American history, children that started school this school year, the majority of those kids are kids of color. So whites have become the majority minority group starting in the school system. And in fact, in places like Oregon and California and other states, it turns out that in another 5 years or so, 4 out of 5 kids that's going to be graduating from high schools is going to be of color. So those demographic changes are having a very significant impact on what our extension professionals do as well. And the aging of America as well. We've got a demographic that's aging very rapidly. Our National Agricultural Statistics Service undertook a survey here back in February, March. They released the survey, the census, ag census, and they tell us that the average age of the American farmer is about 58.3 years of age. That's also having an impact on what our extension professionals are going to be doing as we go forward as well. So there's a whole bunch of these factors that are part of this new economy. In addition to that, throw in these things as anti-intellectual, anti-science sort of a conversation that we have in many parts of the world, and particularly in America. We have these sorts of conversations as well. So how does this extension professional take science-based knowledge and try to deliver that if indeed you've got this sense of anti-science that is being exhibited by many of the people that they're going to be providing that information to? So the new economy is going to have a huge impact on how this extension professional is going to be doing what they end up doing. Along with that, we got a whole bunch of societal challenges as well. These are the sort of the global challenges pertaining to climate change or population or energy or poverty or health. All of these are having an impact. In fact, look at the portfolio of efforts that our own U.S. Department of Agriculture is involved in. I dare say about 10, 15, 2,500 years ago, we did not use these terms like climate change in our conversations as a department. But here in the 21st century, that's going to become a very significant part of our conversations. In the 21st century, the environmental stewardship is going to become a very significant part of our conversations. Health, the influence of the food, the quality and quantity, and its impact on health are going to have a significant impact on how we take knowledge and deliver that as well as extension professionals. That's in the context of the societal challenges. And then when you narrow it down to the what I like to call as the 21st century agricultural systems challenges, there's a whole slew of them in there as well. I was referring to the demographic changes that we've got in the farming community, where we've got the average age of the American farmer is 58.3 years of age, and we've got more minorities coming into becoming farmers, we've got women becoming farmers, all of these changes that are taking place. How do we, collectively as the U.S. Department of Agriculture, ensure that those individuals that want to get into the agricultural enterprise, production agricultural enterprise, are able to stay competitive, that they can indeed put a few more dollars into their pockets as well? What should we be doing? What should NIFA be investing in terms of the science that takes into consideration that they would be able to put a few more dollars in their pockets? Along with that, there's an expectation that agriculture is going to have a very small footprint. In fact, we've been accused here in the recent past. For example, Toledo, Ohio, with Lake Erie, with the algal blooms that have suddenly started occurring, and you've got these toxins that are being produced in that water, and they very quickly started pointing the finger at agriculture as being the number one contributor to the occurrence of these algae in Lake Erie. Well, there's no evidence to say that that's indeed true. And so what we have to do, what USDA has to do, is to be able to provide the wherewithal. Extension folks have to be able to go in and have these conversations with people. There's a lot of angst amongst people as well about this ecological footprint. And so we have to be very mindful, and that's going to have an impact on what Extension ends up doing here in the next century. The bioeconomy, health, and indeed the impact of food on health, the quality and quantity, particularly the number of calories that we consume, everything from cancer to cardiovascular disease to dementia. For example, excessive intake of glucose has been shown to have an impact on the occurrence of dementia and Alzheimer's disease in people, not just older people, but also younger people that are consuming excessive amounts of calories, that you're starting to see these tantalizing evidence of the formation of plaques in brains that is being tied to the amount of glucose that's being consumed as well. In fact, since about the 1880s in America, every succeeding generation lived for a little bit longer than the preceding generation. And that's the way it's been for all of these decades, except for the children born in the decade of 2000. Those kids are going to have a shorter lifespan than their parents, in part because of the impact of three things: calories, sedentary lifestyles, and behaviors as well. You got children that are about 8 or 9 years old that have heart disease. Children that are 8 or 9 years old that have high blood pressure and things like that. So what is this extension professional supposed to be doing in helping them understand the connectivity between food and lack of activities? What is the 4-H professional supposed to be doing in helping making sure that those children have better health outcomes and life outcomes as well? And last but not least, the importance of youth, family, and communities in the context of our societies that we're in as well. You go to Amish country in Ohio, in Indiana. We got Amish kids smoking dope and doing speed. Okay, Amish kids. That's the last group that you would think would be involved in partaking of, in quotes, recreational drugs. So how does our extension professional that's working in the realm of 4-H, working in the realm of youth development, now go ahead and work with these disparate communities that they have to be working with as well? Traditionally, Amish would never reach out to Extension or any other people. Now, it turns out that in Ohio and Indiana and places like that, indeed, the Amish communities are also reaching out to Extension. Actually, it's Extension folks that are reaching out to those Amish communities as well. So this is the context in which we have to think of Extension as we go forward in the 21st century. And so, as we're thinking about that 21st century, what is that value proposition? There's a lot of conversation that's taking place here around the United States, particularly probably in the last about 10 to 15 years or so. People saying that, well, we don't need Extension anymore, you know. Folks like Monsanto, they'll take care of all these things. Or there's private enterprise that can deal with it. Why should we invest public dollars in this enterprise called Extension? We don't need to do this at all. So what is that value proposition? And what is the essence of Extension itself that we need to be thinking of? So it really boils down to the fact that people are getting information in multiple different ways. I mean, what's the first thing that you and I would do as soon as we want to find out about whatever it is? We start Googling. That's the very first thing that we end up doing. That's exactly what people are doing as well. Why should anyone worry about contacting Marty Draper as a plant pathologist if I can go to Google and put in whatever words I want to that relevant to that plant pathogen or the symptoms that I'm seeing and get all of the information? Okay? And so how can Extension demonstrate its value? And that's the next set of slides that I'd like to focus on as well. So in order to do that, we have to think of how people make decisions. And from a neurophysiological standpoint, what are the processes going on in the brain itself? And neuroscientists tell us that the way you and I make decisions it's referred to as template matching. In this particular graphic, you've got the various shapes up above the head of the square and the circle and the triangle, etc. And inside of that brain of that head that's in there, you've got an outline of those same shapes out there. There's a star, there's a triangle, there's a square, etc. And if it turns out that those two things match, then the decision is, yes, I'm going to go ahead and accept that or do it or whatever that is. But it's impacted by the milieu. This is the environment in which you and I live, the internal environment as well as the external environment. This is the education that we receive. This is our hormonal status. All of these have an impact on how we make decisions. Like, for example, Malcolm, if you've just probably eaten lunch here about an hour and a half ago or something like that, and if I brought you, maybe you had a burger, and if I brought you a burger, you probably say, no, I've already eaten. Because his hormonal status is such that he doesn't want to accept that. Although he sees the burger, there's the template matching, he could go ahead and accept it, but he wouldn't because he's already full. That's what his hormonal milieu is saying. But on the other hand, if I brought a nice piece of carrot cake, I assume that you like carrot cake, a lot of sugar in it and things like that. So what it does is it gives you a super stimulus, as it were, and then Malcolm's going to go ahead and grab a hold of that. Although he's not hungry, he's still going to go ahead and eat it. And that's exactly what happens. That's what the milieu is referring to. That's how you and I end up making decisions. But education is a very big part of that as well, by the way, of this milieu that you and I are in. And the other part of how extension professionals allow people to start thinking of making decisions is I like to call it the framing effect. If you went to, so I'll give you a little bit of a story here. There's a young woman in Kansas. She was, full of energy. She wanted to go do something about climate change. She went to western Kansas and was trying to tell people out there to go ahead and incorporate weather stripping in their windows, replace the windows, etc., etc. And she said, and you're going to save the earth because you're going to deal with climate change. And, Kansas, western Kansas is now the bastion of liberal thinking, as you probably know. And so they, threw her out on her ear, as it were. And she went back and she talked to her dad, who's a friend of mine. And then she went back to that same place and started talking to those individuals again and pointed out that instead of going there and talking about climate change, she started saying that if you were to change the weather stripping, if you were to change the windows, you're going to see savings in your utility bill. And you're going to see a few more dollars in your pocketbook. So it becomes a pocketbook issue. So the framing becomes a huge issue. So our extension professionals continue to frame in a way that it makes sense, that it's going to be acceptable to the individual that's receiving that information as well. In addition to that, there's got to be, the signal-to-noise ratio is very critical. There's a lot of noise in the world, unbelievable amounts of noise. This graphic here shows you the noise is that straight baseline or the little squiggly baseline that you've got. And that's noise. You're receiving information from the radio, from television. In fact, there's a study that was done here recently that says that you and I, as Americans, we are being exposed to 75 gigabytes of data per day. 75 gigabytes. That's about anywhere from about 7 to 10 DVDs of information. And we're exposed to 105,000 words every day. In that noise, how does this extension professional then go ahead and have his or her signal stand out? And that's what the signal-to-noise ratio is. Very critical that the signal-to-noise ratio be thought of as well as you're going around providing the information. And that's part of this essence of extension. That's part of this value proposition as well. And so if you ask Marty Draper and the others that have been in Caroline Crokel and the others that have been in extension for a very long time, they'll use words like it's science-based, it's evidence-based, there's objectivity, and you can trust these things. And that's a very critical part of the characteristics of extension itself. And also, they might talk about the fact that there's a lot of site specificity that's utilized in this effort. They serve as conveners. They're part of the community that they live in. Our extension agents and our extension educators, they live in the community where they're going to go and provide that information. So there's a lot of trust that's built in. There's that human interaction that takes place, that human interface that's part of that face-to-face interaction as well. They might use targeted approaches to deliver that information or use shotgun approaches. And there's a whole slew of other characteristics of this essence of extension as well. There's the things related to the value proposition, the social business model. All of these are going in this construct as Marty Draper is going around as an extension professional. All of these are happening in his mindset. Trying to think of how do I increase the signal-to-noise ratio? How do I frame this? What's the value proposition that I'm going to bring to this particular conversation, etc. And there's credibility. Incredible credibility because of that trust that has been built because they live in those communities as well. And everybody's using different approaches, different media to deliver information. YouTube is, very popular, and YouTube has literally billions of videos that's out there. Now, in those billions of videos, how's Marty Draper going to go ahead and say, I'm going to provide some information about this fusarium pathogen on wheat? Okay, on wheat. Yeah, that's right. You came from South Dakota. On wheat. And so he's going to make that available. He's going to put a fancy schmancy video on YouTube and all that. It's one of these multiple billions of them. Nobody's ever going to see it. So how do you create this channel? In fact, even to think of channels, there are 500 million channels on YouTube, by the way, today. And it's constantly growing, almost exponentially growing, the number of videos and channels and things like that. How does he do that to make sure that his signal is what's being received by these individuals as well? He's got to build that because he's got to demonstrate that value proposition as well. And we got everybody on social media. I like to say that there's a lot of twits running around tweeting here in the world today. And everybody wants to do it. Okay? It's 144 characters. And in those 144 characters, Marty Draper is going to talk about the impact of climate change, the impact of droughts on the ability to grow wheat, for example. How does he do that when people are only willing to receive that information in 144 characters when you've got these societal challenges, this new economy, this 21st century challenges and things like that? Really makes it a difficult proposition to think about as well. Indeed, there's a study done by Margaret Wolf at Tufts University. She has discovered that in just the last 20 years, since the internet became quite insidious in our daily lives, has discovered that there's what's called this digital circuitry that is developed in people. And she's done MRIs on graduate students, of course, as volunteers. And she's looked at people that tweet and do Facebook and, Google and all these things. And people, apparently there's a few that don't do any of that. And so she's looked at their brains as well. It turns out, so if you and I, ordinarily, we pick up a book, we start reading it, usually you end up going pretty seriously from the first page to the last page, particularly if it's a very critically important book for you. Sometimes you and I would skip a few pages and get to the end as well. But typically that's the process, the linear process of accessing information. But what has happened in the last 20 years or so, because of the influence of the internet, is this linearity. So you would get on a website, click on it, read one or two lines, then you go to the next link, click on it, read one or two lines, click on it, go to the next line. How do you keep these people to stay on your web page? Very difficult to do that in the context of this digital circuitry that is taking place. And so how do you take that context? And how do you take Marty Draper to now go ahead and work as this extension professional as you go forward? All of these things need to be part of this value proposition itself, because people are wanting to receive information in a particular way, in a particular medium, etc., and they're not able to actually focus and study and read the complexities that are associated, whether with climate change or whatever else that we're talking, or health or whatever else that we're talking about as well. So it ends up being this mishmash. That's what this individual is being exposed to. That poor guy in the middle there, in the bottom there, he's being subjected to all manner of things coming along. And that's the context in which this 21st century Marty Draper needs to be thinking of. So he needs a new compact for the 21st century, along with thinking about signal-to-noise ratio, Twitter brains, digital circuitry, on and on and on. And it's about these transformative approaches. At the end of the day, it is about transforming lives. Still is. It doesn't matter. We're 100 years later, it's still about transforming people's lives. And it is really very deliberate. It's integrated. It focuses on programs and issues. And at the end of it, after all of that, it has an impact, a positive impact on changing behavior and or practice. And it's driven by audiences. It's not that he's just going to broadcast all this, y'all come and we'll provide you this information, but it's very highly targeted. And that's where you start having that transformative impact as well. It's a very critical part of what, this 21st century extension is all going to be all about. What are the elements of that transformative program then? There's a whole series of them. Obviously, the issues have to be identified. Then you got to take all that knowledge and help develop it. It may be what he's done research on, Marty himself, or there are others around in the region that have done that research that you might be accessing. Or it's e-extension that's crowdsourcing all of these people to provide that information as well. And think about the outcomes, the methods to use, the resources, and there's a marketing aspect as well. For a very long time, for the last 100 years, Extension's model was, I make this happen, y'all can come and take it. And now it has to be a very active process of actually going out there, engaging, marketing, being involved, in your face sort of an approach is what it's going to take in terms of this transformative approach. And also very critical to continue to focus on the evidence-based, the evaluative methods that I referred to earlier, and that really at the end of the day we're assessing outcomes as well. It's not just enough that he's done 5 radio broadcasts and 10 newsletters and things like that, but indeed it's having that impact on people in the lives that they're having as well. So what are the characteristics of this new compact that Marty's going to develop? And when you think about that, it goes back to, again, that continuum, that learning, discovery, engagement continuum, that thing that I referred to earlier. And so it takes this new sort of an innovation ecosystem that brings together a crowdsourcing of bringing together of the private-public partnerships, and it takes into account the demographic changes that have gone on, focuses on creation of jobs. It's not enough for you to go ahead and say, I'm going to provide this information. All of us need to be mindful of the fact that at the end of the day, it is about creating jobs. It is about the economic well-being of our communities as well. So in the old days, 100 years ago, it was very simply a partnership between the federal, state, and county government, the three-way partnership that I referred to earlier. Today's context of this innovation ecosystem is you've got public, private, federal, state, local, global, foundational, all of these folks that are coming into play. They don't necessarily have to be all players in every aspect of everything that Marty does, it waxes and wanes depending on the context in which he's providing that information to that end user and those stakeholders that are a very critical part of this as well. So that 21st century extension is going to be very information-driven and technology-driven. In fact, wearable technologies are becoming a ever bigger part of what we do. Just yesterday, Apple released their Apple Watch. That's going to be measuring your heart rate and pulse rate and blood pressure and everything else. And imagine those wearable technologies that you could have. Or Marty, as an IPM extension specialist, might have a drone, for example. He might use that drone to go ahead and scout the crops. He could have robots that are down in the inside of the crop canopy that's all picking up this information, sending it to him on his smartphone or tablet or whatever it is, and he's trying to make decisions about utilizing those technologies. And he's going to be a data-driven kind of a person in the 21st century. He's going to be convening all this data, analyzing it, curating it. It's not enough that he is a plant pathologist. Now he's going to have to be a data guru as well. Can you actually do that? There's an expectation that the 21st century extension professional is going to have to be able to do that. And with the crowdsourced citizen science, citizen scientists being involved in this enterprise as well, getting everybody involved in this process. It's not the old style from 25 years ago, Marty, of I do this thing and people come to me and I put out a newsletter or whatever, but it's actually this active engagement of the end users and yourself as well, using all of those technology. And then there's the thing that I like to call this personalized extension. You know those YouTube channels that I was talking about? There's a personalized approach that Marty's going to start undertaking as well. That is, depending on the context in which each one of you is, your own background, male, female, demographic, what kind of crops you're growing, etc., etc., he's going to create personalized channels to each one of you. And that's what it's going to be coming at in the 21st century as well. Then he's going to have the relevant skills. I'll say a few words about simulations and Google Glass and Oculus. So what's going on right now, and particularly in another 5, 10, 15, 20 years, are these shared experiences. Marty, traditionally, would get a phone call or an email from a farmer saying, I got these pathogens on my field, come on out. So he would truck out there, take his pickup truck and do windshield scouting and head on into the field and do all that. Now, that farmer could go ahead and wear his Google Glass or Oculus. This is a company that Facebook just purchased, by the way. And they could just download whatever that individual's seen to Marty, or Marty can wear those glasses and have the same experiences that that particular farmer underwent as well. So the future, as we're thinking about these wearable technologies, the use of drones, use of shared experiences and things like that, are all going to be part of what Marty's going to be thinking of as he's trying to become this extension professional in the 21st century. Competition. There's a lot of competition. Companies got their own folks running around as extension people. You got consultants. You got certified crop advisors. But guess what? Those folks are coming and learning from Marty Draper about their own knowledge. They're not able to generate knowledge. They're only able to go ahead and sell the knowledge. But they're getting that knowledge from guys like Marty or folks like Caroline Crokel that's sitting here as well. That's where they're getting that information from. So I don't think we should be overly concerned that, oh my gosh, private enterprise is going to take over. Social media are a very significant part, whether it's Twitter or iCow, Facebook. Say a little bit about turmeric farmers. This is in India. Or iCow. There's a woman in Kenya who has connected with a whole bunch of dairy cow producers, dairy cow farmers, and she sends on her little cell phone, not smartphone, little cell phone screen, information about estrus, about feed prices, about milk prices and things like that. And they're making decisions based on that. And that's going to be the norm almost of generating and providing information. That's that social media that you've got more and more of. For example, Digital Green. I don't know if anyone of you have seen what Digital Green does. Go to digitalgreen.com. They're the Facebook for farmers. That is to crowdsource all farmers to feed into that space. And that is now being utilized by other farmers as well. So what Marty's going to end up doing is to convene those sorts of efforts, creating those very specialized channels, creating that personalized extension, etc., as part of this 21st century extension. But at the end of it all, regardless of all the data, the doodads, the gee-whiz drones and wearable technologies and Google glasses and all that. It's the human interface. That's what keeps Extension ahead of the game. And that continues to be a very important part. That is that trust. That is that locally relevant, evidence-based information that is going to be produced as well. That needs to be front and center in his mind as he's thinking about bringing to bear all these doodads and gizmos and gee-whiz type things as well. So, when you think of the 21st century extension, then there's a, you know, previously I talked about engagement, translation, and transformation. And now what we see today, as we project out in the 21st century, is engagement, literacy, and change is what's being enabled by people like Marty as he projects out into the 21st century. So I've been asked this question many, many times here in the last few years. Do we really need extension in the 21st century? I tell you, I can say it unequivocally. Because of the challenges that we've got, because of this new economy, because of these societal challenges, because of the 21st century food systems challenges and things like that, we have to have people like Marty Draper and Caroline Crokel and others that are the ones that are able to take that knowledge, translate that, and deliver that as well. They're going to utilize all the technologies, but at the end of the day, is that human interface that is a very critical piece of it. And we're going to have that public investment in this for this public good that's going to take place as well. So I want to end now by quoting a piece of what Abraham Lincoln said. At the end of the war, he gave, you know, as you know, he was incredibly eloquent, and he gave a speech. In it, at the end, he talked about our nation having to think anew and act anew. And I think for Extension as well, we have to think anew and act anew as well. So with that, I want to thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share a few thoughts about the 21st century Extension. Thanks again.
We can take some questions.
Yes? I know you, but you might want to introduce yourself, please.
I'm National Program Leader for Plant Breeding and NIFA, and also Senior Advisor for Plant Production, Plant Health, and Plant Products in the Office of the Chief Scientist this year. And my question, Sonny, is in one of your slides, maybe 6 slides back, you alluded briefly to the beginning of the process, identifying problems of pulling together the information and so on. How do you see Extension as part of a cycle to communicate back to the research community, which is now no longer from farms? Yes, from urban areas perhaps, but there's that role as well.
Right.
On the other side.
So Anne-Marie Throw, who's sitting here in the audience, she is one of our staff members in NIFA, now working in the Office of the Chief Scientist. And her question is, how does the Extension professional engage with the researcher? Because of that connectivity that's needed, the discovery of new knowledge that needs to be connected as well. So,
Knowledge is needed.
indeed. And so the other part of her question is, and what new knowledge is needed? And that's a crux of this, the success of Extension is in part that connectivity between the discovery and the delivery. What the Extension professional is doing really, in part he or she is also discovering, but they work with the research community of the discovery of new knowledge. And so if they've identified an issue, I'm going to take fusarium as a problem, and so the issue is we're having control failures, and we're losing our crops to wheat crop to fusarium, to scab, and that's the issue. And he's going to go ahead and convene these researchers and have this conversation, show them the samples and things like that. That's still the same process. That's exactly how he's been doing it for the last 100 years. That needs to continue to happen as well. That level of engagement needs to continue to happen. You can't get away from that. The discovery part and the delivery part need to be connected, and our Extension professionals tend to be in the middle of it. Any other questions or comments? Yeah.
My name is Yvonne Jackson, and I'm a senior executive at Dr. Farms Group. I'm on an IPA assignment at Alabama A&M University, and I'm interested in finding out how do you see the land-grant universities transitioning to support this 21st.
Yeah. So Dr. Yvonne Jackson, sitting in the audience here, She is a senior executive within USDA. She also works with Alabama A&M University as the 1890s liaison. And her question is, how do I see the involvement of land-grant universities in this 21st century extension? Did I paraphrase your question? Yeah, okay. So the bottom line is, the land-grant universities are smack dab in the middle of this 21st century extension, because the Marty Drapers of the world are members of that land-grant community that have the, land-grant universities, for those of you in the audience that don't know, have this tripartite mission of research, extension, and teaching. And so it's a very critical part. It is the land-grant university's persona, and they continue to foster this enterprise as well. So the Cooperative Extension Service that we support, NIFA USDA supports, is actually vested in the land-grant universities. All we do is to provide them the resources and hold their feet to the fire as well in making sure that they're being held accountable. Any other questions? Yeah, Carol, Dr. Krokel.
Thank you. You hinted about the need, not even hinted, you said we need to be really in your face in terms of our marketing and communications. And, ever since I started my extension career, that's always been a challenge. Why don't we market this work well? And why is it the best kept secret? We've been saying that for 100 years. And so many people have benefited from this program. So what would you advise those of us at the federal level, especially about marketing?
Yeah. So Dr. Caroline Krokel, who is one of our staff members in NIFA, her question is about marketing itself. I talked about the need for marketing being in your face, and that's what it's going to take in this 21st century situation that we're talking about. And I think, if you look at the genesis of extension, where it comes from, it really comes from a very rural sort of a construct. And this is my personal observation, and I think rural type construct people, farmers and homemakers and others, end up being, in quotes, the stoic lot. They don't brag about things. They just get the work done and go on. And that's where extension comes from as well, is you get the work done and you go on. You don't talk about it, you don't brag about it, and that's part of that persona of the rural communities. But then you've come into the 21st century. Recall I talked about signal-to-noise ratio. You got all these other competing demands that are going on as well. And we have to stand up and stand out. And if we don't do it, then we've not been effective in taking that information and providing that to transform people's lives. And so the role that, again, like you, I've lamented as well about the fact that this is a well-kept secret. And my own thinking about this is that it's also a part of the training that we need to be offering our own, people that are involved in the extension enterprise itself. It again goes back to the Moral Act. And we've sort of walked away from the Moral Act itself, which is, it called on three things to happen in the Moral Act. The first of which is all these young people that were disenfranchised, they were going to get this education at these land-grant universities, to have foundational knowledge in liberal arts, humanities, sciences, like the 3 R's and things of that nature. And then built on top of it was practical experiential education, as we call it today, education in the agriculture and mechanic arts. But the third part of it is the military leadership qualities, and not so much the learning how to shoot guns as much as leadership qualities in terms of communication skills, critical thinking skills, problem-solving skills, and things like that. And to reinvent it, to reinvigorate it, so that young people that are going to come into this enterprise, they get that sort of an ability inculcated in them, and they start becoming much more adept. It's not enough for you to go ahead and say, go use Twitter, or go use social media, or go give a speech. But we have to inculcate those sorts of skills as well. And I think we have a role to play in that. In fact, you and Dr. Qureshi and others, we've talked about, education as we, project out in the future, what sort of skills. It's not enough. That's why I'm very concerned in America. We've gotten on this bandwagon about STEM education, STEM education, STEM education, as though we're going to have a bunch of technicians running around. You know, I tell you, the Chinese are going to eat our lunch because technically they're damn good. I think what keeps America ahead of the game and allows us to be globally preeminent is those leadership qualities that our everybody brings to the table. The critical thinking skill, problem-solving skill, communication skill, and things like that. And we really have sort of walked away from that, inculcating that here in the United States. And I would say probably in the last about 30 or 40 years, and re-energizing it. That's what you're seeing in land-grant universities and other places as well. Now, people are building or creating leadership academies and things of that nature. I did it in my past life before I came to NIFA, is created those sorts of enterprises. And in our funding programs, I hope that we can provide funding for those sorts of enterprises as well. I think that's what it's going to take for us as a federal agency, as USDA thinking about leadership skills. We support 4-H. We support FFA. These are all enterprises that help develop, inculcate those sorts of leadership skills as well. Yeah, way in the back there. And your name, please? Okay, Ms. Maureen, I didn't get your last name, but... I'm with OCIO. Okay. And I'm interested in herps and reptiles and amphibians. Okay. And I'm interested in fish. Wow. In the OCIO's office, no less. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so Ms. Maureen, I still didn't get your last name. She's within the USDA as well, in the office of the Chief Information Officer. And her comment first and question was really about projecting out in the next 100 years. It's the year 2114, and there's somebody standing here like that, and maybe we still have this. The question is, will we have, for those of you online, I'm pointing at behind my head, I think you can see it too, online. There's a picture, an image of the USDA building. It says Department of Agriculture, Washington. And the question is, will there be a USDA? Will there be some enterprise that's going to mind aquaculture, herpetology, and other things that Ms. Maureen's interested in? I tell you what, as long as humanity has to eat, drink water, breathe air, reproduce, doing all that, as long as that's happening, you're going to have some entity like USDA available to you. We're going to have to figure out better ways of producing food, cheaper ways of producing food, getting that food out, the logistics, the policies, the regulations, exporting, all of that is going to be happening. We're going to have a USDA. Okay? The second part of your question, well, I defer to my colleague, Dr. Broussard, Merrill Broussard, who is one of the world's experts in the area of aquaculture. But I think, sorry, Merrill, I had to pick on you a little bit. But at the end, I think, as long as you got a USDA, and as long as we got APHIS, Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, and other aspects of USDA, which we're going to have. We're going to be importing stuff. People are going to try to smuggle in stuff. We need to protect our borders and things like that. And we got to make sure that with the changing diets, we're going to be relying on fish and other aquacultural products and things like that. We're going to have a way to make sure that those things are being dealt with. If it's herps, snakes, then we need to be worried about that too. And whether they're native species or invasive species, USDA has a very significant role to play in all of those spaces. So as a betting man, which I am, I'll bet you we're going to have a USDA in the year 2114. I bet you we're going to still have people that are going to work on herps and amphibians and everything else in between. All right, thanks very much again, everyone. Happy birthday to Extension. Thank you. Yeah,